Chapter 3. A Shared Variable. The fragile peace Leo had engineered for himself lasted for 2 weeks. It wasn't a friendly peace, but a tense ceasefire. Mark and Josh watched him with a new, grudging suspicion. They didn't understand what had happened, but they knew he was responsible. Their bullying became less frequent, more cautious, like prodding a strange animal they weren't sure would bite. For Leo, the quiet was a welcome respite. It gave him more time to disappear into his books, to explore the infinite, orderly landscapes of mathematics. One Saturday afternoon, Leo was trying to wrap his head around the concept of infinity. He was sitting on the floor of his room, his father's old copy of 1-2-3, Infinity open in his lap. He was so engrossed that he didn't hear his door open. "Leo," he looked up, startled. It was Aunt Carol. She rarely entered his room, respecting it as his territory, with a kind of weary deference. She held 2 mugs in her hands, a thin wisp of steam rising from each. "I made hot chocolate," she said, her voice soft. "Thought you might like some." Leo stared at her, momentarily speechless. An offering of hot chocolate was so far outside the normal parameters of their relationship that he didn't know how to compute it. He nodded, and she came in, carefully stepping over a stack of library books. She handed him a mug and sat on the edge of his bed, an awkward guest in this tiny space. "What are you reading?" she asked, gesturing to the book with her mug. 1-2-3. Infinity, Leo said. It was my dad's. Aunt Carol's face softened, a rare sight that changed the tired lines around her eyes. "Oh, I remember that one. Your mom used to joke that your dad loved numbers more than he loved people." She took a sip of her chocolate. "That wasn't true, of course. He just ... understood them better." Leo held his mug, the warmth seeping into his hands. He and his aunt rarely, if ever, spoke of his parents. It was a topic shrouded in that heavy, oppressive silence. To hear her mention them so casually felt like a window being opened in a stuffy room. "Care. Your mother was the one with the puzzles," she continued, a small, sad smile on her lips. "She loved them. Crosswords, jigsaw puzzles, logic problems. She used to say that every puzzle had a solution, you just had to be patient enough to find it." She looked at Leo, her gaze direct, and, for the first time, seemingly clear of exhaustion. "You get that from her, I think. Your patience." Leo didn't know what to say. He had always associated his mind with his father, with the logic and the numbers. The idea that some part of his mother, a woman he remembered for her warm laugh and the smell of lavender, was present in his quiet. Methodical thinking was a new, startling variable. "She was smart," Leo said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Brilliant," Aunt Carol corrected him. "She just didn't show it off with big books and fancy words like your dad did. Her intelligence was quieter, more practical." She looked around the small, neat room, at the perfectly stacked books and the organized desk. "She would have loved how you keep your room. She always said a clear space made for a clear mind." They sat in silence for a moment, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't empty, it was full. It was filled with the shared memory of 2 people they had both loved and lost. Leo felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate. "It's not easy for you here, is it?" Aunt Carol said, her voice barely a whisper. Leo looked down into his mug. He could have listed everything. The taunts, the isolation, the constant feeling of being an outsider in his own family, but he didn't. He just shook his head. "No," he said. Aunt Carol sighed. It wasn't her usual tired sigh, but one filled with a deeper regret. "I know I'm not. I'm not her, Leo. And I'm not always fair. My boys ... They can be a handful. I get overwhelmed, and I just ... I don't know what to do sometimes." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "But I do care about you, Leo. I hope you know that." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. It wasn't a solution to his problems. It didn't magically erase the cruelty of his cousins or the profound loneliness of his life. But it was something. It was a shared variable in an equation he thought he was solving alone. It was a moment of connection, a tiny island in the vast, silent ocean of his grief. "I know," he said, and for the first time, he thought he might actually mean it. She finished her hot chocolate and stood up. "Well, I'll let you get back to ... infinity." She gave him another small, sad smile and left, closing the door softly behind her. Leo sat there for a long time, the book forgotten in his lap. The conversation hadn't changed the fundamental structure of his life. He would still have to navigate the hostile territory of his home. But something had shifted. A new piece had been added to the puzzle. His mother's patience, his aunt's regrets, his own quiet strength. He looked at his father's book, at the complex ideas and symbols on the page. He thought of his mother, patiently fitting the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together. He realized they were two sides of the same coin. The logic of his father and the patience of his mother. Both were his inheritance. Both were tools he could use. The house was still quiet. But for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like an echo of what was lost. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. Chapter 4. The Zero-Sum Game. The years between 10 and 14 moved like a slow-motion flood. The water level of time rose incrementally, almost imperceptibly, until one day Leo looked around and realized he was in a different landscape. He was taller. His voice had an occasional, embarrassing tendency to crack. And the world of middle school was a far more complex ecosystem than the one he had left behind. Kami. His relationship with Mark and Josh changed. It evolved from simple, overt aggression into something more complex and, in many ways, more damaging. As they all grew older, the intellectual gap between Leo and his cousins widened into a canyon. Leo devoured books on calculus and physics for fun, while Mark struggled to pass basic algebra and Josh relied on charm and corner cutting to get by. The report card became the new battleground. Every quarter, the scene was the same. Aunt Carol would sit at the kitchen table, 3 envelopes in front of her. She would open Mark's and sigh. She would open Josh's and her lips would tighten. Then she would open Leo's, and her expression would be a complicated mix of pride and frustration. His perfect grades were a problem she didn't know how to solve. They were a constant, shining indictment of her own son's mediocrity. The phrase, "Why can't you be more like Leo?" became a toxic refrain in the house, a poison that seeped into the foundations of their family. Mark and Josh realized that physical torment and overt destruction were no longer effective. Leo was too smart to be caught in their simple traps, and their mother's frustration was increasingly directed at them, so they changed their tactics. their bullying became a campaign of psychological warfare. A zero-sum game where their goal was to subtract from his life whatever small joys he managed to find. It was a war of attrition, fought with whispers and exclusion. If Leo made a friend at school, Josh would find a way to sidle up to them, planting seeds of doubt with carefully crafted lies. He's a little weird about his parents, you know? He never talks about them. It's kind of creepy. Or, he thinks he's a genius. He'll correct your grammar if you're not careful. These were small, venomous darts, designed to isolate him. Mark's approach was less subtle. He used his growing physical presence to intimidate. In the hallways at school, he wouldn't shove Leo, but he would stand too close, blocking his path, forcing Leo to walk around him. He would accidentally knock books out of Leo's hands between classes. At home, he would take over the living room television, blasting it at full volume when he knew Leo was studying, a constant low-level assertion of dominance. Their combined strategy was effective. Leo found himself adrift at school, an island in the crowded hallways. He ate lunch alone in the library, not just because he enjoyed the quiet, but because it was easier than navigating the social minefield his cousins had created. He retreated further into his fortress of academics, the walls growing higher and thicker with every book he read, every theorem he mastered. Chap became his only shield and his greatest liability. The better he did in school, the more his cousins resented him. The more they resented him, the more isolated he became. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. One afternoon, Leo was in his room, working on a model of a geodesic dome, a complex structure of interlocking triangles. He found beauty in its perfect symmetry and strength. He heard his aunt's car pull into the driveway, followed by the slam of car doors. A few moments later, he heard yelling from downstairs. It was Aunt Carol and Mark. This was not unusual, but the intensity was. Leo crept to the top of the stairs, staying out of sight. Double quotes, ... Failed. You failed English, Mark. How do you fail English? You speak it. Aunt Carol's voice was raw with disbelief. Teach. It's not my fault. The teacher hates me, Mark bellowed. Oh, the teacher hates you. Or you didn't do a single bit of homework all semester. It's him. Mark suddenly roared, his voice filled with a genuine, desperate rage. It's always him. All I ever hear is Leo gets straight A's. Leo is so smart. You think I like being compared to that freak all the time. He makes me look stupid. You make yourself look stupid. Aunt Carol shot back, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Leo retreated back to his room, his heart pounding. He looked at his perfect, intricate dome. Mark's words echoed in his head. He makes me look stupid. He hadn't intended to. He was just ... being himself. He was just trying to survive. But he saw now that in the closed system of their house, his success was directly proportional to their failure. For him to win, they had to lose. It was a zero-sum game, and he was beginning to realize that in games like that, nobody ever truly wins. The cost of victory was a currency of resentment and hate, and the debt was growing larger every day. He sat down at his desk and stared at the geodesic dome, a perfect shape in an imperfect world, and for the first time, he wondered if his fortress of numbers was enough to protect him from the emotional shrapnel of the war he was winning.